Unions. We read about them in newspapers, we hear about them on television, but you know, most of us don't really know much about them. Who they are, what they do, or how they work. Since a union is now trying to become your legal representative, there's a lot of information about them you need to know. First, let's look at some facts about unions. A union is a business. They don't make a product, they don't sell a product, but like any other business, they need to make money in order to operate. And how do they make their money? Simple. They charge dues to their members. The amount of money they charge each member multiplied by the number of members equals the amount of money each union makes. Now what this means, of course, is that the more members a union has and the more money it can charge each member, the more money the union has to spend. But if it starts to lose members, it begins to make less and less money. Let's look at what's happened to union membership over the last few years and see why the unions are working so hard to try to sign up new members. Unions in general are doing very badly. In 1954, they represented over 32% of the workforce in the United States. That number gradually declined between 1955 and 1975, and then between 1975 and today, the number has decreased dramatically, so that now unions represent only 16.4% of the workforce. That means that today, less than 1 worker in 5 chooses to be a union member. And remember, fewer members result in less dues and less money. Why is union membership decreasing? Well, lots of reasons really. Layoffs in unionized industries, plant closings where unions used to represent the employees, lost elections and decertifications, people kicking the union out. What this means is that unions are rapidly losing members and now have fewer and fewer people from whom they can collect dues. So if they want to stay in business during the decade of the 90s, they need to increase their membership. Why are unions so interested in more money? And how do they spend the money they collect in dues? Well, let's take a look at a typical union and find out. Each year, every union has to file a form with the United States Department of Labor stating how much money they took in and how that money was spent. The form is sort of like your income tax return, and it's called an LM2. In this case, they collected over $6 million in dues from their members during the year. The union spent over $500,000, or 8.3 cents of every dollar collected from its members, for office expenses. $300,000, or 6.2 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went for publicity. $850,000, or 13.9 cents of every dollar collected, went for benefits to union officials, such as cars and expense accounts. $264,000, or 1.7 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went for miscellaneous expenses. Over $1 million, or 17.3 cents of every dollar collected, went to pay the union's taxes. And finally, how much do you think the union bosses spent on their own salaries? Well, over $3 million, or 50.5 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went to its officers and employees in salaries, salaries of the union bosses, and special friends of the union bosses. What all this adds up to is that 97.9 cents of every dollar the union collected from its members went to benefit the union, not the union members. That means, are you ready for this? Only 2 cents of every dollar you spend on union dues is left to benefit the union members. All the rest of your money benefits the union bigwigs. If you want a similar return on your money, you'd probably be better off with a lottery ticket. Another reason unions are having such a difficult time is they're becoming a thing of the past. Years ago, when they were more successful, people didn't mind putting the control of their future in the hands of an outside third party. They didn't mind being told when they should go on strike or that the union decided not to process their grievance. But today, things are different. People want to have control over their own lives. The problem is, unions haven't changed. They still believe the same conditions that existed in 1930 or 1940 still exist today. They think today's worker and today's company are exactly like the workers and the companies of the past. Labor unions have failed to adjust to these changing conditions. They can't adapt to today's world, and they're becoming extinct. And what about unionized companies? Well, they're in terrible trouble. Take the automobile industry, for example. How many foreign cars were sold in the United States 25 years ago? Almost none. And how about today? Just take a look in any parking lot. Why did it happen? In unionized industries with restrictive work rules where the union is not interested in the success of the company, it's difficult, if not impossible, to compete in the world marketplace. But in non-unionized industries where everyone in the company can work together as a team, the future's bright. That's one of the reasons why so many large, predominantly non-union companies like IBM, Walmart, McDonald's, and Kodak are so successful. Employees in these companies have said no to unions, and by rejecting them have actually ensured a more secure job future. So rejecting unions is not only a good idea from a personal standpoint, it's actually one of the best ways to ensure a secure future. Continued stories about union corruption have also made it tough for them to sign up new members. Employees today are simply not willing to trust their working lives to individuals who are only interested in feathering their own nest. Now, some people might feel that stories about union corruption and unions being controlled by criminals are just fiction. But recently, Fortune magazine published an article entitled "The 50 Biggest Mafia Bosses," the crime business. Who runs it, how they manage it, who profits and loses. That article listed these mafia bosses and told where they get their money. Of the top 50 leaders of organized crime in the United States, 18 get a substantial portion of their income from unions, including 8 of the top 12. Now, what does this all mean to you? Recently, a union has been trying to get you to vote for them in a National Labor Relations Board election. You're probably wondering what this election is all about and what will change if the union wins. First, in order to have an election, the union was required by law to obtain authorization cards from at least 30% of the employees in the group they're seeking to represent. A union authorization card is a legal document. If you read the fine print, you will find that most authorization cards are really membership applications to the union, and that once you sign this card, you have designated the union as your collective bargaining representative. When the union has obtained the required number of cards, 30%, they give those cards to the National Labor Relations Board and petition for an election. The board then notifies the company that a petition has been filed and that an election will be held. However, and this is very important, the election will be by secret ballot. Everyone in the eligible unit can vote whether or not they signed a card, and you can vote whatever way you choose. You can vote no against the union even if you've signed a card. Now you know why it's so important for the union to sign up new members. They need more money. You also know how they go about getting new members, by trying to convince people to vote for them in NLRB elections. So now, let's examine the question of your personal decision about your vote in the upcoming election. First, the National Labor Relations Act, the law that regulates union activities, gives you the legal right to vote for or against the union. But before you make that decision, let's look at some facts about unions. Facts you need to know before you decide how to vote. When a union is attempting to get potential members to vote for the union, a paid organizer is usually assigned to the campaign. This paid organizer may stand outside company property and hand out union literature, or may try to form committees of current employees to help him win votes. The organizer can legally promise employees anything: higher wages, better benefits, improved working conditions, less work, anything in order to get a person to vote for the union. These promises are not illegal. A union organizer is a salesman. His job and his pay are based on his ability to get people to join his union. Just like any other salesman, he'll tell you only the things he thinks you want to hear in order to win your vote. Now, because the union wants your vote so badly, they may be willing to try and trick or deceive employees. Some of the typical union tricks include: you could be asked to attend a union informational meeting. At that meeting, you'll be pressured to support the union. You could be told you're the only one in your group who hasn't decided to support the union and to get with the team. That usually isn't true. Many times, the union organizers will try to get employees to force other employees to support the union. Some of their standard approaches include: do me a favor. Help us get the union in. Well, it could prove to be a very expensive favor. Since co-workers are more likely to trust each other than an outsider, the union has come up with a trick to take advantage of this. The new tactic is what they call their Apprentice Organizer Program. And this April 1990 newspaper article tells how it works. They train thousands of people to be able to sell the union just like their professional organizers. And then they send these people out to find jobs in the non-union workplaces. After the undercover organizers are in the company a while, they begin to go to work for their real bosses, suggesting how a union might be able to help out workers. Before you know it, the professional organizer shows up to cash in on the work of his apprentice. The unions have trained thousands and thousands of employees to do this. So remember that what looks like a spur-of-the-moment idea that unionization could solve your problems was probably deliberately planted by the union. These repeated requests to support the union are made in the hope that eventually they'll wear you down. But stand up for your own rights. If you don't want to support the union, don't do it. Unfortunately, people are often told by union pushers that if they don't support the union, their work relationship will suffer. Sometimes the approach is even more direct and threatening. Those threats may be illegal and certainly show the union's true colors. If you should feel threatened, you can bring that to the company's attention. They will take all appropriate actions to deal with it. But remember, when a union wins an election designating them as the collective bargaining representative, they win one right, and one right only: the right to negotiate with the company. Nothing more, nothing less. The truth is, a union organizer can promise everything, but he can't guarantee anything. If you'd like to prove to yourself that this statement is correct, ask a union organizer or someone who's pushing the union to give you a written guarantee that the union will get employees a certain amount of increase or a particular benefit, or that there will be no strikes. And if you really want to put the organizer to the test, ask him if the union will make up the difference if they're not able to keep their promise. When a union becomes the collective bargaining representative of a group of employees, all it means is that the company and the union will sit down at the bargaining table and negotiate. The union can ask the company for all the things the organizer promised you, but the company is not obligated to give anything other than what it feels it can afford to give or what it's willing to give. It's kind of like a game of let's make a deal. But when the deal is made, employees can't be sure of what they might wind up with. It could be more, it could be less. Or they may wind up with the same thing they started out with, plus having to pay union dues. The union knows this is true. That's why they can't guarantee you anything. Everyone should be very careful about believing what union organizers promise when they're trying to get people to vote for their union. The National Labor Relations Board, the government agency that regulates union organizing attempts, has stated very simply, collective bargaining is potentially hazardous for employees. And as a result of such negotiations, employees could possibly wind up with less benefits after unionization than before. So, you can clearly see that designating a union as your collective bargaining representative is just a roll of the dice, but a roll with very high stakes. Another very important point people often forget when thinking about a union is the obligation members have to that union. All members are obligated to abide by the Constitution and bylaws of whatever union they join. Now, on the surface, this may not sound important, but when you consider the restrictions and obligations union constitutions place on their members, it becomes very important. For example, did you know that union constitutions contain pages and pages of restrictions on their members' rights? They do. Did you know that the Constitution of the United States is only 7 pages long, while the Constitution of most unions is over 100 pages of very fine print? And what's in all those pages? Let's take a look at some union constitutions and find out. Here's a provision talking about union dues. It states that dues can be increased from time to time at the union convention. Here's a provision talking about assessments. It states that whenever the union needs extra money, it can assess its members whatever amount is needed. This provision talks about fines. It says a union member can be fined whenever the union thinks the member has stepped out of line. Another provision talks about trials. That's right, trials. It says a union member can be put on trial. Here's a provision talking about rules and regulations. One of the rules says that if you don't like the union and try to get it out, you can be put on trial and fined. Another rule says that if the union calls a strike and a member continues to work, that member can be put on trial and fined. And the Supreme Court of the United States has upheld the right of the union to fine its members. But these are just examples. Remember this, most union constitutions are over 100 pages long. 100 pages of rules, regulations, and restrictions on what their members can and cannot do. When most people hear the word union, the first thing they think about is strikes. Unions are famous for them. But how do strikes happen? As we said earlier, when a union becomes the representative of a group of employees, it sits down with a company and the two sides bargain. But when they can't agree, there are really very few things the union can do to try and make the company meet its demands. One of the things it can do, and the most frequently used tactic, is to call the employees out on strike. There are a few things about union strikes you need to know. Things no union organizer is going to tell you. First of all, if you go out on strike for more money or better benefits, you receive no paycheck from the company, and your benefits are terminated. No paycheck and no benefits. Second, in most states, you cannot receive unemployment compensation. No unemployment compensation. And third, you can be permanently replaced. Yes, no matter what the union organizer may tell you, if you go out on economic strike, the company can hire permanent replacements to fill the jobs of the people who go out on strike. And when the strike is over, those replacements can keep those jobs as long as they want them. The National Labor Relations Board has put it very simply. An employer may permanently replace economic strikers. And if that's not enough reason to avoid strikes, there's the violence that so often goes along with union strikes. Friends become enemies, tempers flare, damage is done, damage that sometimes can never be repaired. Frequently, union organizers try to convince employees that strikes are a rare occurrence. But let's look at the facts. According to the United States Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the government agencies who are responsible for monitoring union activities, strikes are a relatively common occurrence. For example, according to the Department of Labor, in the 5-year period between 1985 and 1989, employees missed 44,798,000 workdays because of strikes. Now think about that. Almost 45 million workdays. And it's very important to point out that these figures compiled by the Department of Labor include only those strikes involving 1,000 or more employees. Strikes involving less than 1,000 employees are not included in those figures. So as you can see, with a union, strikes are a very real possibility. A possibility you should consider when deciding how to vote. Now, what about job security? Union organizers often try to tell people to support the union with the promise the union will provide everyone with job security. But let's take a look at some facts. As we said earlier, union membership has declined dramatically in recent years. We've all seen television reports and newspaper articles about plants closing and massive layoffs in many parts of the country. What most people don't realize is that many of these companies that have closed or had massive layoffs are unionized companies. In fact, many of those layoffs or closings may have been avoided if the union was not involved. So belonging to a union does not provide job security. But that's not the only way they fail to deliver on the promise. In states where they're legal, most union contracts contain what's called a union shop clause. Now, a union shop clause requires every employee to join the union and remain a member or be fired. This is important to the union because they don't believe in letting the individual make up his own mind. They know that without this provision, many employees would not join, and they wouldn't get that employee's money. And if you have any question about how important money is to the union, take a look at this letter from a major union to a company. The first paragraph of the letter states that an employee has failed to pay his dues on time. The second paragraph states, we therefore request that in accordance with the union contract, this employee be discharged. What does this tell you about the union? Whose security are they really interested in? So there you have it. What can a union really do for you? Strikes, dues, fines, assessments, constitutions and bylaws that restrict your rights as an individual. But they can't guarantee any improvements. So let us make our position on the union issue very clear. We don't want a union here. We feel more can be accomplished if we can continue to work together, one-on-one, without union stewards, union officers, and without you having to pay union dues, fines, and assessments. But the company doesn't decide the issue of unionization. You decide that issue for yourselves. No one, either the company or the union officials, has the right to interfere with your free choice. We don't believe the union is in your best interest or in the company's. Our futures are all better served by working together toward a common goal without the interference of an outside union whose interests are elsewhere. Support yourself. Support your future. Vote no. Job security. That's a subject unions frequently talk about during an organizing campaign. They would like to try and convince you that with a union, you would have more job security than you have now. But what is job security? Where does it come from? And most important, can a union do anything to improve job security for its members? Well, first, most people would define job security as the knowledge that they could never lose their job without a justifiable reason. No fear of layoffs. No fear that their company would go out of business. In short, a secure feeling that as long as the company is strong and healthy and they do a good job, they will have a good job. Now, if that definition is correct, what can a union do to create or improve the job security of its members? Well, let's take a look at some facts. Unions do not create or maintain jobs. They don't get customer orders. They don't pay wages or provide benefits. Unions don't do any of these things. They can't keep a company healthy. They can't prevent layoffs if business conditions warrant. In short, they can't help a company stay in business. In fact, many people feel unions do just the opposite, that they keep companies from being as successful as they could be. Job security has not been high on the agenda of organized labor's demands in America. In fact, in those few industries where labor agreements include measures providing so-called job security provisions, job losses have been large and long-term. Let's look at some specific examples and see why the people who feel that unions cause job insecurity are probably right. First, there are a few numbers that should be considered. The Department of Labor consistently tracks changes in the rate of employment in the United States. We've all seen and read about the changes in the rate of employment. What many people don't know, however, is that the Labor Department also keeps track of employment rates by industry. Let's look at some recent figures and compare unionized industries with non-unionized ones. In 1984, there were over 94.5 million people employed in the United States. Today, there are over 108.5 million people employed, an increase of 13 million new jobs, almost 15%. But how have unionized industries done during the same period? In the mining industry, one of the most heavily unionized in the United States, over 244,000 people have lost their jobs, a decline of over 25%. In the basic steel industry, another of the most heavily unionized sectors of the economy, over 60,000 people have lost their jobs, a decline of almost 18%. Why has this happened in these unionized workplaces? Well, employers in these heavily unionized industries are plagued with inefficient operations and job restrictions caused by the provisions contained in many union contracts. These expenses decrease a company's health and can lead to massive layoffs. The big three automakers, for example, have recently been forced to schedule hundreds of thousands of layoffs in order to remain competitive with rising numbers of foreign imports. In fact, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics' most recent survey, well over 50% of the jobs lost during layoffs occurred in highly unionized sectors of the economy. Yet in non-union industries, employment has increased, and in some cases, increased dramatically. In the service industry, for example, one with very little union representation, over 6 million new jobs have been created, an increase of 29%. So if a union tries to tell you they can prevent you from losing your job by creating more favorable business conditions, ask them how many unemployed union members there are in the steel industry. In fact, you may want to ask the union why they're so willing to spend all this money on organizing new members when they could be helping out their currently unemployed members. You can count on the union being interested in you only as long as you're bringing home a paycheck. But where will the union be if they cause you to lose your job? Odds are pretty good they'll be somewhere else looking for a new paycheck to take the place of yours. So unions can't provide job security because they can't do anything to keep a company or an industry healthy. But unions can do things to cause people to lose their jobs and even their way of life. Recently, a company called the Bunker Hill Mining Company, a silver mine, was operating in Kellogg, Idaho. The mine, whose employees were represented by a union, was not making a profit. The company that owned the mine decided to either close down the operation, which would have put over 2,000 employees out of work, or try to sell the mine to another company. A local investment group agreed to purchase the mine and save the jobs of the employees. However, the group had to have the support of the union in order to approve a new union contract and make the sale final. The union employees of the Bunker Hill Mine Company voted to accept the contract, but the International Union refused to abide by the vote of their local members and would not sign the agreement. The International Union rejected the vote of its own members, denied the request of the governor of the state of Idaho, and ignored the pleas of senators and members of Congress. Finally, because of the failure of the union to approve the new contract, the investment group was forced to withdraw their offer to purchase the mine, and it closed. Listen to what an employee of that mine and a union member had to say about the closing.
I'm an unemployed Bunker Hill mine worker, along with over 2,000 others due to the action of the union who did not honor the vote and wishes of its members. All the union members of Bunker Hill Mining Company voted to accept a new contract which would allow a group of investors to purchase the Bunker Hill mine and allow us to keep our jobs. A new contract wasn't exactly what we wanted, but it was our only chance to keep our jobs, our homes, and our families fed and clothed. When we voted to accept the new contract, we went against the wishes of the International Union, located over 2,500 miles away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We lost our constitutional rights that day. They allowed us to vote, but then, because it did not go their way, they said the vote was no good, and they would tell us what was good for us. What they told us was that we were better off out of work and on welfare. Today, most of the 2,000 former employees of Bunker Hill Mine have left the area. They were forced to sell out and move because there were no jobs here in Kellogg. The union has ruined the lives of thousands of people. Finally, I would say this to you. Keep control of your own lives and destiny. Keep control of your own money. Once a union has control, you will be dictated to and told what to do. And my experience is that what you will be told is what is best interest of the union and not what is in your own best interest. Unions do not provide job security. Just ask the over 2,000 people who used to work at Bunker Hill and are now out of work because of the union.
That's just one example of the union causing employees to lose their jobs. A pretty dramatic one. Over 2,000 people out of work because the union wouldn't listen to its members. Does that sound like job security to you? It sure doesn't to me. Unions often talk about employees needing an equal voice in their own lives. But the former Bunker Hill Mining Company employees know firsthand whose voice is listened to in the end. Yet this tragic incident is only one of thousands that occur every year. Recently, a union newspaper carried a story about a strike at Western Brass Company. At the time of the story, the strike had lasted over 6 months and was still going on. The average length of service of the strikers was 16 years, and at least 2 workers had more than 35 years of service. In the meantime, the jobs of these workers had been filled by permanent replacements. The union, instead of trying to work with the company to solve the problems which led to the breakdown of negotiations, declared a boycott against the company. Now, this means the union was attempting to keep people from buying the products manufactured by the company. They were trying to put the company out of business. They were also trying to destroy the jobs of their members. Not only are the employees still out of work today, if the union has their way, there will never be a job for them to come back to. Again, this sure doesn't sound like a union trying to provide job security for its members. Believe it or not, unions are increasingly boycotting companies even when they've not called a strike. I know that's hard to believe, but here's an example. At Whirlpool Corporation's Fort Smith, Arkansas facility, the union called a boycott in May of 1990. There was no strike in progress, and all union members were working. The boycott was called because the union couldn't get what they wanted in contract negotiations. Obviously, this decision on the part of the union was protested by a large part of the union membership. But the International Union, going against the wishes of many of its own members, called for customers of Whirlpool to buy products from Whirlpool's competitors. Incidentally, this boycott comes at a time when the Fort Smith plant is making huge investments to improve its productivity and maintain job security for its employees. Listen to what some Whirlpool employees had to say about the union boycott.
Well, if it worked, it could cost us our jobs. That's what it could do.
I think it's not right. I think there's probably 3/4 of people in the plant that doesn't back the boycott. I know them go around and say that they have a big following on the boycott. They don't. They're just blowing smoke, and the public ought to know that they don't. That the people in the plant doesn't back it. They've thrown our Constitution out and don't want to follow that. So I don't know what they're going to do about it. I want to see them either get this contract settled or get the union out of here so we can live in peace. We're tired of it. We're fed up with it. Something's got to be done.
I've been there for over 17 years, and I was a dues paying member for 17 years. And I go along with what they're doing. I don't go along with the boycott. It's going to cost us our jobs and our children don't have a future. There's a lot of people that are single parents like myself. Okay, if the boycott works and you are laid off due to a labor strike, you cannot draw unemployment. I am a single parent. My son's father has never given him $1. I lose our home, I lose everything we've got, and I have very, very difficult time even seeing that he finishes his other 2 years of school. That's where it'll lead to. The union now, they are not protecting our jobs by condoning this boycott. They're trying to give our jobs away.
I want the public to know that what they've been hearing about the boycott of the Whirlpool products is not backed by the majority of the people, as has been stated before. The majority of the people are actually against this boycott. I don't really believe the union gives much thought to the fact that the product they're boycotting is the same product that brings them a good livelihood, as well as many others in this area. And what we want to do is secure our jobs for now and for the future. And we want the public to continue buying Whirlpool products, because we feel that working at Whirlpool has brought us a good life, and we want to continue providing the world with a good product.
What's morale like right now?
It's down. It's got people that were friends, they're not friends anymore, they don't speak. Used to they laughed and joked, but now they just walk by like they don't know you.
And finally, here's a news report on the boycott from a Fort Smith television station.
We're not out here to damn the union. We're out here to save our jobs. If Whirlpool can't sell them, we don't have a job. We can't build them.
These workers tell us there are 2,000 others in the plant who feel the same way they do. But they say Solidarity members have threatened workers who don't support the pro-union cause. But at least some Fort Smith employees think their jobs are stakes that shouldn't be used in this 8-month-old poker match.
This anti-company and anti-employee action taken by the International Union is threatening the jobs of all Whirlpool employees and is most certainly not a way to ensure job security. Another example of unions creating job insecurity occurred in Charlotte, North Carolina, when a union won a representation election at Edgeco Metals Company. Following that election, the union and the company met in an attempt to negotiate a contract that was acceptable to both sides. The company and the union negotiated for over 9 months without reaching an agreement. A major issue the two sides could not agree to was dues checkoff, the provision which provides for the company to automatically withhold dues from each employee's paycheck. The union wanted the company to withhold dues. The company said no. Following 9 months of negotiations, the union called a strike. After the strike began, the company exercised its legal right and hired permanent replacements for all the employees who went out on strike. Though the strike had begun, the company and the union continued to negotiate, and the company continued to operate the business with permanent replacements. After another 6 months of negotiations, the union finally realized the company was not going to agree to the dues checkoff provision and the many promises the union made to the employees during the campaign. Finally, 15 months after the election, the union withdrew representation. They walked away, leaving the employees who had supported the union and gone out on strike without anything. No job, no pay, no benefits. They had no concern for the future or the welfare of these individuals. What happened here? The union won an election. They couldn't get a guarantee that they could collect their dues, so they called the employees out on strike. They caused the employees to lose their jobs, some with over 30 years of service. And then the union walked away. These 4 cases are just examples of a union causing entire groups of employees to lose their jobs. What about individuals in companies that aren't on strike or in some other kind of trouble? Can the union cause job insecurity in those kinds of companies? You bet. Here's a typical union contract containing a provision entitled Union Security or Union Shop. In some states, this provision is illegal, but in most states where it is legal, you'll find a clause like this in almost every union contract. The clause states that in order for a person to keep their job, they must become a member and remain a member of a union. If they don't become a member of the union, or if they fail to pay their dues after they become a member, the union can require the company to fire the employee. This clause is extremely important to the union because they know that most people who understand what a union can and cannot do and who have a choice would not belong to a union. This clause does nothing to provide job security for the individual. And if you think the union would never use this clause to fire a person, better think again. It happens all the time. Here's a letter from a major union to a company in which the union represents the employees. The first paragraph states that an employee has failed to pay his dues on time. The second paragraph states, we therefore request that in accordance with the union contract, the employee be discharged. What does this tell you about the union? Whose security are they really interested in? Incidentally, while this union's contract spends almost 2 pages talking about union security, there is not one provision that mentions employee security. Speaking of union contracts, let's look at a few and see what they actually say about job security. Here's a provision that talks about preferential seniority, or what some people call super seniority. Preferential seniority or super seniority means that union committeemen and stewards are artificially given more seniority than anyone in the company or department where they work. What this means is that in case of a layoff, people with more seniority than the union officials would be laid off, while the union officials would be allowed to keep their jobs. Whose job security is the union really interested in? It's pretty obvious. They're more interested in their special friends than they are with the majority of employees. Here's a provision that talks about job restriction for employees. Now, job restriction means that if work is slow in your area, you would not be permitted to move to other work or do other jobs. Unions often try to restrict your work to one task, though most people feel they benefit by being moved to other work when their regular work isn't available. Sometimes the work available may not be what you would want to do for a long period of time, but most people would prefer to continue to work at something rather than be laid off. But under many union contracts, if work was slow in your department, you'd be out of work. Some union contracts are so strict that companies are forced to lay people off out of one department while they're hiring people into another. In fact, these restrictive clauses may hurt management's ability to run the company profitably. Again, another way in which unions actually jeopardize a company's health. No work, no pay. Is this job security? Of course not. Here's a provision called the Management Rights Clause. It's important for everyone to understand that almost all contracts in the United States contain a provision very much like this one. This clause defines what rights the management of the company retains, even though a labor contract is in effect. It states the company has the right to hire, fire, classify, suspend, promote, release for lack of work, discharge for proper cause or other legitimate reason, and evaluate as to ability. The company also has the right to determine products to be manufactured, plan and schedule production, set standards, methods, processes, and means of production, and enforce all rules and regulations. If the company maintains all these rights, it kind of makes you wonder what rights the union gains and why people would be willing to pay a union to represent them, doesn't it? Surely there could be better uses for your money than paying union dues. For example, if you're 35 years old and invested $10 a month in a passbook savings account, which is less than you would probably have to pay in union dues, you would have this much money at age 65. If the same money were invested in union dues, you would have nothing. Dues cannot buy job security. Some of you might be thinking, well, maybe the union doesn't provide job security, but at least with the union I'll get more pay and have better benefits. Better think again. For several years now, non-union employees have been receiving larger pay increases and better benefit improvements than people who are represented by a union. According to the United States Department of Labor, the raises negotiated by unions for their members recently have been averaging between 1.5% and 3.5%. That's right, between 1.5% and 3.5%. And many recent union settlements have actually resulted in wage reductions. On the other hand, employees in non-union companies have been doing much better, receiving pay increases 2 to 3 times the amounts received by union members. Less job security, smaller wage increases or even wage cuts, strikes, the chance the union can have you fired if you fail to pay your dues, granting super seniority to union stewards and committeemen, job restrictions, all these things become part of your life when you belong to a union. So unions do not provide job security. In fact, without a union, you have more job security than any union could possibly provide. You have the opportunity to help make both yourself and your company successful by doing your very best. The opportunity to advance on merit rather than by being a union committeeman or steward. The chance to work together with the management of this company to outperform the competition. More job security and a better future, period. And all without a union. Vote for yourself. Vote for your family and your future. Vote no. Collective bargaining. You hear a lot about it during a union organizing campaign, but what is collective bargaining? What does the term mean? And what, if anything, is its importance to you and to the union that's trying to win the right to become your legal representative? Well, first, what is collective bargaining? It simply means that when a union is the legally elected representative of a group of employees, the National Labor Relations Act requires both the company and the union to sit down together and negotiate over wages, hours, and working conditions. The key word here is negotiate. When a union, any union, wins a National Labor Relations Board representation election, all they win is the right to negotiate with the company. Nothing more, nothing less. The union can try to make you believe anything, promise you anything, but the truth is all a union wins is the right to negotiate. Now, some people think that when a union wins an election and starts bargaining with a company, all wages and benefits you currently have will be the starting point, and everything will be negotiated up from there. This simply is not true. While no one can predict what the outcome of negotiations will be, the fact is all wages, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment, those you have now as well as those the union has promised you or implied you would get, are subject to negotiations. During an organizing campaign, the union's chief tactic is the big promise, or at least the illusion of the big promise. No one would vote for a union or agree to pay union dues if they didn't believe they would get more money, better benefits, or improved working conditions. And certainly no one would vote for a union if they thought they could suffer a wage decrease or lose benefits. So it's the job of the organizer to try to convince the voters in an election that by voting for the union, things will only improve, and that the money the union will cost the employees is a good investment. Some organizers will even go as far as to promise or guarantee improved wages, benefits, or working conditions. But the fact is, the only thing a union gets when it wins an election is the right to negotiate. Following any election victory, the union is certified as the collective bargaining representative of the voting unit for a period of 1 year. Now, during that year, the company must meet with the union for the purpose of collective bargaining. At these meetings, the union can make proposals, and if the company doesn't agree with those proposals, it may reject them or make counter-proposals, even if those counter-proposals contain lower wages, fewer benefits, and less favorable working conditions than existed before the election. You see, the company is not legally required to sign a union contract at all, even after negotiating at great length and making every effort to reach an agreement. No company is ever required to agree to union demands it considers unfair or unreasonable. And any change in wages, benefits, or working conditions depends strictly on the outcome of negotiations and not what the union or people supporting the union have promised or implied. As we stated earlier, no one can predict what the outcome of negotiations might be. But just think for a minute about the things you've heard and read about recent union contract negotiations. Many contract negotiations today result in what are called concessionary agreements, in which the union settles for lower wages and fewer benefits. These kinds of agreements are not just the exception, hey, they're common. What this means is that unions are now settling for less and less, not just in first contracts, but in other contract negotiations as well. This chart clearly shows what has happened to the wages of unionized workers since 1982. In each year between 1982 and 1988, 22 to 44% of union members had their wages frozen or cut. Now think about that for a minute. The union wants you to vote for them, and yet many of the people they already represent are suffering either wage freezes or cuts. It just doesn't make much sense to pay an organization dues, fees, and possible assessments for nothing. And even in contracts where employees receive so-called raises, their wages are only being increased to the point they were before unionization. A union in Seattle, Washington, for example, just negotiated a contract that brings wages back up to the 1982 level. That's some accomplishment. Another interesting fact is that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, wages and benefits for union members rose by an average of 2.5% in 1989 compared to 4.9% for non-union workers. So people who are not represented by unions are doing much better than those who are union members. What all this means, very simply, is this. If the union wins the election, the company and the union would sit down at the bargaining table and negotiate. The union would probably ask the company for all the things it's promised you or implied that you would receive if they won the election. But make no mistake about it, the company is free to say no to any union demand it feels is not in the best interest of the company or the employees. It's sort of like the television game show Let's Make a Deal. And when the deal is made, you could wind up with more. You could wind up with the same thing you started with, or you could wind up with less. The union knows that if most people voting in the election are aware of these facts, they'll probably vote against the union. Therefore, the union will probably tell you that negotiations will begin with the base of your current wages and benefits and can only be negotiated up from there. Just so you have no misunderstanding about exactly what the facts are, here's some information you should consider. The National Labor Relations Board has stated on many occasions that collective bargaining is a two-way street. In one case, the board said, there is, of course, no obligation on the part of an employer to contract to continue all existing benefits, nor is it an unfair labor practice to offer reduced benefits. But perhaps most clearly, the board has declared collective bargaining is potentially hazardous for employees, and as a result of such negotiations, employees could possibly wind up with less benefits after unionization than before. Now, what all this means is that the union cannot guarantee that if they win the election, anything will improve. In fact, if the union wins, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to keep the same things you have now. Your wages and benefits could go down. This is the truth, regardless of what the union might tell you. Now, let's look at some facts. When a union is conducting an organizing campaign at a company, one or more organizers are assigned to try to sell the employees on the idea that a union is their best chance for gaining improvements in wages, benefits, and working conditions. Sell is exactly the right word, because that's what a union organizer is, a salesperson. The organizer is a paid employee of the union, whose job is to convince employees to vote for the union. He or she may even be on commission, meaning the more people the organizer recruits, the more money he or she makes. And just like any other salesperson, the organizer will try to convince you to buy this product by pointing out the supposed good points about unions in general and his or her union in particular. If you go to a car salesman to buy a car, you don't expect that salesman to point out any of the car's bad features, right? Well, union organizers are just like used car salesmen and will only tell you the things they think you want to hear in order to try and win your vote, even if they know you're about to get stuck with a lemon. Let's look at some of the things unions say or imply in order to try and win the votes of people they want to organize. Higher wages. This is probably the most frequently used union campaign tactic. The illusion that with a union, employees will make more money. First, as we saw earlier, unions who win elections gain only the right to negotiate with a company, nothing else. During these negotiations, a union can ask the company for more money, but the company can say no. And that's all the union can do, ask. For there's no law that requires the company to increase wages or even to keep your wages at the same level they are now. So, can the union guarantee you higher wages? No. Better benefits. That's another popular campaign promise. The same thing we talked about concerning higher wages also holds true here. The union can talk about better benefits, but the truth is they can only ask. And the company can always say no, or propose a benefit level that's less than what you have now. Is the union able to provide you with better benefits than you currently have? No. Better working conditions. While the union can again promise improvements, they can't guarantee them. In fact, many people feel that working conditions get worse when a union wins an election, particularly when it comes to getting problems solved. With a union, all problems must go through a network of stewards, committeemen, and other various union officials. This means more red tape, delays, and decisions about your personal problems made for political reasons rather than based upon the facts of your individual case. So, will the union improve working conditions? No. Let's take a look at an actual case and see what happened to one group of employees who believed these promises. A union was trying to organize a company in San Antonio, Texas. The employees listened to the promises of the organizer and voted the union in. During the course of the negotiations, the union negotiators traded certain benefits and programs for their own pet provisions. The employees lost much of what they had before the union won the right to become their collective bargaining agent. Later, many of the employees wanted to know what had happened. The owner of the company responded to the employees in this letter. Let me read part of it to you, and I quote, "Our employees fell for the union promises and voted to go union. Here's what happened after that. The companies rejected all the union's demands and submitted their own contract to the union. In the end, the union finally accepted the company's contract. With regard to wages, the highest paid employees received considerably less than the union had promised. In fact, only a handful of employees were classified as journeymen. The remaining employees were slotted into lower paying apprentice classifications. The important point, however, is what happened to fringe benefits. Before the union came in, employees enjoyed numerous benefits, including paid holidays, paid vacations, group hospitalization, life insurance, profit sharing, annual bonus, and such. When the negotiations ended, the employees had lost every existing benefit through the course of collective bargaining. Those employees learned the hard way that union promises don't mean anything. They learned that if a union wins an election, everything is subject to negotiation. A similar case happened in Orlando, Florida. A group of employees voted in a union. In time, a contract was negotiated with the company. Here's what some of the employees who were involved in that situation had to say about the union promise of higher wages.
I paid union dues to lose money.
One employee I know lost enough money in 1 month to make a house payment, all due to the union.
The union failed miserably to bring about additional benefits and pay raises as they had promised.
All that a union can do is cost us money.
The union promised raises they couldn't deliver.
Our rate of wage increase was going down instead of up.
We had more before the union came in than after.
Here's what they had to say about the union promise of better benefits.
You know, they promised better benefits, but when they got in our plant and we asked them about these things, they said, don't bother us with penny-ante things like this.
When it came right down to it, the union didn't get us any more raise, insurance, sick pay, vacation, or holiday.
When the first contract was negotiated and signed, the employees lost some of the benefits we already had.
They promised to make things better for you, but they'll do nothing but make things harder on you.
We were promised in union meetings that we would have dental insurance. We never did get it.
The union said that we would have more and better benefits, but the contract was ridiculous.
They failed miserably to bring about additional benefits.
There are many other cases like these, so don't be misled. When people vote for a union, they really do gamble with their future. By now, you may be asking yourself, how can it happen? How can a union agree to a contract that provides for less than the employees had before the union came in? Like we've seen, collective bargaining is a matter of negotiation. When negotiations begin, there are really three parties involved: the company, the union, the employees. Each party is interested in obtaining the best possible deal. The company is interested in maintaining all rights to operate the business as economically as possible. The employees are interested in obtaining the best levels of pay, benefits, and working conditions. The union is interested in protecting its financial position by assuring that all employees it represents are members and pay dues. When the union submits its proposals to the company, they always ask for dues checkoff, and where legal, union security clauses. The dues checkoff provision requires the company to deduct union dues from the paychecks of employees and submit that amount in a lump sum to the union each month. This ensures the union will get all its money without having to go through a collection process and without having to face members who may be unhappy with them. The Union Security Clause requires all eligible employees to become and remain members of the union in order to keep their jobs. If any of these people don't pay their dues, the union can force the company to fire them. These two clauses are very important to the union. Without them, they can't be assured of collecting their dues from the employees. When the union submits these